Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I'm your host, Art Stapleton, and it's a special edition today because we have a special guest. And Tyler Dunne, I've known for a while now. He is on the site, golongtd.com, starting his own venture. They've done a lot of great work, really kicking off over the last couple of years. If you go back a couple of years when Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll took over with the Giants, Ty did a very interesting autopsy, if you will, of where the Giants were. So now a one giant leap. Tyler has a 3-part series that hit this week, and I want to bring him on to talk about it. So without further ado, Ty Dunne, what's up, man? How you doing?
Art, it's a pleasure to be here with a legend in the game, man. You're an OG, right? I hope to be covering this game for many, many years like you, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. So thanks so much for having me. And you ain't kidding. It's I don't know where you even start with this team, but you mentioned the autopsy, and I had so many mental flashbacks to how people in the building described the organization then and how they describe it today. And the whole point of this is, like, we can look at a final score, we can look at the standings and personnel, but like, to become a winning team, there is so much more that goes into it. There just is. And I think that Joe Schoen understood it. I think he knew what he got himself into. I think they rolled over a shade under $14,000, like by far the worst in the NFL.
Yeah.
And there's no talent. Right, very, very minimal talent. I think there's 6 non-specialists on the team today from the team that they inherited. So there's a lot that goes into it, right down to how you treat scouts and how you scout players. So it was really fascinating to kind of get there, see you in person, watch some of these training camp practices, and get a handle for how in the hell you change what was. And maybe there's fans out there that, like, they're tired of Dave Gettleman talk and Joe Judge talk. And I get it, but I just think that, the CJ Strouds of the world and these quarterbacks who come in and like wave a magic wand and turn teams into contenders, like, it's almost kind of broken our brains. Like, it does take a while to turn a team around. You look at the Detroit Lions. I think the Giants are following a similar blueprint here.
Yeah, the Lions, it's definitely similar to what they tried to do. Not any two teams follow the same path. That's why, Dave Gettleman going back was mocked when he said, he wanted the Green Bay model at quarterback or the Kansas City model. There is no model. The reality is, in today's NFL, you've got to basically, roll up your sleeves and get ready to go. And you find out there's a lot more to change than what you expect when you take the job. And, not that Joe Schoen came here with blinders on, but I think once he realized what's the work at hand, we get to it. But now, year 3, you should be talking about turning the corner or having the corner turn. So let's jump into it. First, before we even do that, you clearly have connections with, you've known Joe a while, you've known Brian Daboll, Shea Tierney is quoted heavily in one of the parts of the series. So your days in Buffalo, or at least with these guys, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about that, just how long you know these guys. So, this isn't just a random national reporter, and it happens all the time. National reporters swoop in the summer, they get the access just by, getting a 10 or 15 minute conversation, but it's not as legitimate as someone who really knows these relationships and has built these relationships over time.
To be honest, I don't know those 3 on a super personal level, even though I do live here in Western New York. I think organically, just through the course of reporting on the Buffalo Bills locally and talking to a ton of players, assistant coaches, scouts, it's kind of wild too. I think my memory goes back to Isaiah McKenzie. We did a show together in town at a bowling alley in East Aurora, New York, right? Of course, right. Isaiah McKenzie would do that, but it was a riot. And, he's, a utility player at the time and used here and there, not really featured a ton. Maybe would have a case to make to be featured more. I think he probably got my brain moving this direction first on like Brian Daboll as a coach and as a person, when he was just so effusive with his praise. As somebody not really used a hell of a lot, saying like, this is a coach who just can thread that needle. He is somebody who he'll get on your ass, he'll ride you. We see it every Sunday, right? Like, it's not just the quarterbacks. This is as fiery as it gets out of that job. But it comes from a genuine place. I mean, he's having guys over for cookouts. He's getting to know Josh Allen on the back deck. They're BSing late into the night. So it's a real, authentic relationship. It's not forced. It's not derived from handbooks. I think so many coaches just try way too hard. You saw it there with Joe Judge. I'm sure there's a lot of good to Joe Judge, but as Tiki Barber kind of said, he just tried too hard. And once players sense fakeness and inauthenticity, they're going to tune you out one by one. And he's not alone. I mean, a lot of coaches really, really struggle with it, or they're they go too hard one direction or the other. They're a player's coach, but maybe they cut a little too much. They let a little too much slide. Guys love him. I mean, I saw it with Rex Ryan in Buffalo. It was a country club at training camp. Or it's militaristic, way too far. I mean, that Brian Flores, Tua Tagovailoa stuff is very real. I've talked to people in Miami. Brian Daboll just is able to thread the needle. So to answer your question, it kind of starts there, talking to players about what he's like as a coach. And then, management, obviously they drafted Josh Allen, but you can't just say, oh, that's it. That's why Joe Judge got the job. I mean, everybody wanted Josh. I mean, just about everybody, it felt like, wanted Josh Rosen when that pick was made. They made a hard decision, and at a time when things were pretty fragile. You didn't really know what was going to happen with this new regime, this coaching staff, where the Bills were going to go. They just ended the drought, but man, they gutted that roster. So I think the guts to make that draft pick told me a lot about Brandon Beane and Joe Schoen. Joe Schoen being the right-hand man for Brandon Beane, his old pickup basketball partner there. So I think that experience kind of got me thinking about Joe Schoen in a certain way. And you learn, you grow. I mean, neither one of them are perfect. I think you've seen that in 3 years. They've made mistakes. Daboll with his coaching staff, Joe Schoen, drafted an Evan Neal. But I think if you look at really where the Giants were fundamentally, right, even down to the way those scouts would talk about their boss, to where they are now, it starts with having the right people in charge, and they've got the right people in charge.
Let's jump in because it's in 3 parts, like I said, at golongtd.com, One Giant Leap. Tyler, the reporting, I mean, the access they gave you here is great. The turn the phrase, I mean, you are a great writer. I just thought, it was Joe Schoen's vision, then building a champion, then Daniel Jones's best shot. Let's talk Jones first, because you also had a one-on-one with him that you had as a Q&A. And here's the line that you wrote that I thought was perfect to sum up where Daniel Jones is right now with the fan base, with the media, with seemingly everyone nationally, is that this is where we're obligated to inform you that Daniel Jones stinks. And I think that in and of itself speaks to where Jones is, what he's gone through, and really what it just captures what he's dealing with now. Some of it his own doing, of where we think of Daniel Jones at. What was it like for you to talk to DJ, to hear the feel? Like I said, you were here. This wasn't on the phone. You were here. You were here in the thick of training camp too. So you had the fans behind us as we stood on the sidelines. You heard things. We all hear things. What was your take on that mood, and why was it so perfect for you to kind of lay it out that way? Because it's almost like it has to be a disclaimer before you actually praise Daniel Jones, is you almost have to admit that, yeah, I get it. He stinks at times. He's not good. But tell me about that a little bit.
Right, it's tongue in cheek, because it's like all the cool kids are moving one direction on social media. You better hop in. You better move along with all of the lemmings, otherwise you're a pariah. It's crazy. I mean, I get it. That was an ugly interception, but it was a preseason game. Yeah. He tore his ACL. I mean, Von Miller just told us in Buffalo he shouldn't even played last season off of his torn ACL. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't think these preseason games mean a hell of much at all. I mean, it was good that he was out there, but they see way more in practice, especially getting into the weeds here. I mean, all of the 11-on-11 they did this year versus last year, that's where he's going to be judged, not on that one throw. But it's like, man, it just takes off like wildfire. So, yeah, it's nuts. I'm not telling your listeners, anything they don't know, but it was crazy standing there during training camp, and looking one direction and seeing somebody in a Vanilla Vic styled Daniel Jones jersey. So you see a little hope. And then he throws one interception and first row, full throated, a "you effing suck." Like, players absolutely hearing it right there. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of where Daniel Jones and the Giants are. And I totally get the argument against him. I mean, he has been the quarterback for 6 years. At some point, you kind of know who a quarterback is when he has started 61 games, including the 2 in the postseason. He's thrown nearly 2,000 passes. He had Shermer and Judge and Daboll and Gettleman and different regimes, different coaches. I get all of it, but at the end of the day, if you want to make that case that he is what he is and they should have moved on even after paying him that money, just eat it somehow. I don't know how you get out of it, or just keep him and draft somebody and move on in spirit. I get all of that, but I also think that the Giants deserve a lot of credit for everybody talks about blocking the noise. Every coach says it, every GM says it, and then they don't. They've got rabbit ears. They're on social media. They're reading what we write. They're seeing what's said on TV. They're freaking out. Maybe they even ask a reporter to ask him a question at a press conference so they can make a point. Like, that stuff is real. That stuff happens. I genuinely believe Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll and Shea Tierney, Mike Kafka, everybody, they don't care what's being said on the outside. Like, they want to see this through. They knew what they were up against with the cap, with the roster, and they really believe that now, finally, 2024, Daniel Jones is going to have a fair shot to excel in their offense. I mean, year one, and Tiki Barber said this, like, he's just talking to Brian Daboll, ahead of that year, and Daboll kind of admitted to Tiki, we're not going to be able to do much at all. We just got to give the ball to Saquon. And that's what they did. I mean, it's smoke and mirrors. It's very run heavy, very Saquon heavy. And Daniel Jones played well enough to make the playoffs with Isaiah Hodgins off the street as number one. Right, that was their whole passing game. Play action and choice routes to Isaiah Hodgins, a player who didn't make the 53 this week. It's wild that they made the playoffs. So that season comes with all sorts of variables and caveats, and you didn't even really get to run your offense if you're Brian Daboll, which, by the way, seeing firsthand here in Buffalo, we can get to that. I mean, there are answers for everything. It's fun as hell. It's the old Patriots system with a Daboll twist. You don't really see it. And then year two is Armageddon. You're signing Justin Pugh off the couch to play almost 800 snaps. It's just disastrous. And you still found a way to beat Jordan Love and the Packers when Jordan Love is the best quarterback in the NFL, and you're a Tyrod short arm 2 Rams. So I think finally the Giants, this is the Giants thinking, Daniel Jones has a shot to really excel within this offense, and they believe they know how he's wired. He can handle Daboll's hard coaching, handle a difficult playbook. And if you got Malik Nabers, Jalen Hyatt, Wan'Dale Robinson, you've drafted a wide receiver in 3 straight years. They're making $8.8 million combined this season. Compare that to the $30 million that 5 receivers are making now. I think there's 22 receivers that are making at least $20 million. So that's good forward thinking on Joe Schoen's part. He's going to have a legitimate chance to succeed this season. And I tend to believe in Daniel Jones strictly because I believe in Brian Daboll.
And I think there was a larger segment of the Giants fan base that did believe in Daboll. And then last year happened, and down the stretch of last year, and then all the things in the aftermath of, the Wink Martindale and, his coaches are leaving and nobody wants to be around Daboll, which, I think sometimes there are 3 sides to every story, the one side, the other side, and everything, the truth in the middle, or perception in the middle. But I agree with you. I think another part of this that I wanted to talk about Daniel Jones before we moved on to another part of the series was, you knew Motor Singletary from his days in Buffalo from covering him. And you also talked to Allen Robinson and I think John Runyon too. What strikes me is that it's one thing to go to Darius Slayton, who was drafted with Daniel Jones. And, Darius famously last year around here wore the No DJ slander from New York Revival, wore the T-shirt, constantly defends Daniel Jones on social media. Did it again a couple weeks ago in terms of, when the Jets were kind of laughing at him after the, Sauce Gardner laughing at him after the joint practice. But when you talk to guys that, have no reason to defend Daniel Jones. I mean, Motor Singletary, as good of a guy as he is, you're coming here. If he wants to make a point, he could pull you aside. We've been around enough guys and say, yeah, I don't know, Tyler. I'm not sure. And it's the exact opposite. What do you make of that? What do you make of guys who spend, a couple months around Daniel Jones and they come away with a completely different impression than what the average person around the league might have if they only watch Daniel Jones on TV?
Art, I love the way you framed all of that because that's perfect. And I get it. There's going to be that knee-jerk reaction from the skeptics that will say, well, what in the hell do you expect a teammate to say, right? Especially in today's age where quotes can be repackaged and spit out on social media and aggregated and taken out of context. And I get the player angst and just how that is today and that they might be guarded and effusive with their praise on all the above because they just want to avoid that all. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we know these players on a different level, on a personal level. We've talked to them before. It's not just a matter of recorders out, hit and record, and that's it. I did a feature on Devin Singletary. This would have been 3 years ago. His life story is unbelievable. One of his best friends, really somebody he referred to as his big brother, was murdered. They never found out who did it. Just rocked his world as a kid. He's had cousins that had NFL dreams, had just crazy injuries. And so he's got this perspective. He'll be honest with me. I really believe that. The way you put it, like if Daniel Jones is not is struggling. Maybe it's even body language. Maybe he doesn't have to say anything. Maybe it's just kind of what Sauce Gardner did, intentional or not, the way he was kind of hemming and hawing. You pick up on that stuff, and you're not going to go as all in on somebody when you write or talk about him on a podcast like this. But Devin Singletary is a guy who, we'll start with him and we'll get to Allen Robinson. I mean, Singletary, all he knows is Josh Allen and CJ Stroud. And he's adamant that the stuff that Josh Allen did in Daboll's offense in Buffalo, he believes Daniel Jones can do right now in this New York offense. He can throw, he can run. Maybe he doesn't have that YOLO element and have as strong of an arm. And obviously Josh Allen is on a different level. But he thinks he can function within Daboll's offense in full, which, again, we haven't seen yet. Like that, we haven't really seen them push the ball down the field with real weapons. Right. But Allen Robinson is
do that. They are going to go long to steal your phrase. They are going to be aggressive and look for they're going seeking explosive plays this year because they believe that has to be the difference in this offense. That's no doubt about it.
That's going to be the identity. You're absolutely right. I mean, God, I even when the Bills were winning games here toward the end of last season and they're running the ball more and there is an element to running the ball that you need in the playoffs. You got to have that in your back pocket. But I don't know. I mean, if that's an identity of any team to gain 5 yards, 7 yards at a time and string together 14, 15 play drives, less possessions, less points in today's NFL, that's not the formula. I think the Giants get it. They want to go deep. But Allen Robinson, he's somebody I've known back to his Jacksonville days. I've done stories on him when I was at Bleacher Report and early at Go Long. And man, this guy is unbelievably honest on the record, in addition to off the record. Did a series on the Chicago Bears this offseason, kind of looking back at, Trubisky and Fields and what in the hell Caleb Williams is walking into 100 years of just quarterback hell. And Allen Robinson was a great source for me on that, really explaining why things fell apart with Trubisky and Fields he knows both bad coaching and bad quarterback play and how it can kind of intertwine. And he would keep it real with me. I'm just telling you, like he absolutely would. He's the kind of guy that would pull me aside and say, yeah, man, I don't know about this. But he said he's blown away by Daniel Jones's athleticism at that size. He just hasn't really seen that. He thinks he can process defenses. That was such a problem for Justin Fields and Trubisky. Yeah. But he said he really liked about.
It's been a knock on Jones as well. It has been.
Totally. And time will tell, right? I mean, if they're going to run this Daboll offense in full, finally, we'll see if he can process quickly, get from 1 to 2 to 3. But after kind of saying that he can, another point that Robinson made, I don't think I put this in the story. He said that really what the NFL comes down to, it's that rapport. You've got the options in this offense to change your route post snap. There's an answer for everything, he said. But also with that is the relationship with the quarterback, that rapport, seeing the same thing, reacting to it in real time, telling him in the huddle, hey, if he's doing this to me, I'm going to do it. And it was only a month. I mean, he's barely with Daniel Jones. He's released, right? He might never play it down again. But right. He got that feeling from Daniel Jones. He is a quarterback who can keep up with a receiver and improvise and play that game and toy with a DB during the course of a game. To Allen Robinson, that matters just as much, if not more, than quote-unquote processing.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Listen, I really appreciate your time. This has been great. So let's hit on one last part of it. I thought, the Brian Burns stuff was great. I thought, again, I'll tease it again. You're on here, but go to golongtd.com, read the package. You might agree with things, you might disagree with things, but to me, I don't think you can argue with the reporting that Tyler has done here, and it's well sourced throughout. Maybe that unnamed former scout who went against Dave Gettleman went a little strong, but I do think what was said in that quote and that part was valid about Dave. And that was the biggest problem, the biggest difference between Dave Gettleman and Joe Schoen. I thought you hit on it very well. The idea that, Dave didn't want to hear about anything from anyone. And that was his probably biggest Achilles heel as a general manager. You can't make your scouts feel like they're, bowing at the knee of your general manager. But I think the point that Joe Schoen has allowed a lot of these people that he works with now into his inner circle says a lot about Joe. And I think that's why a lot of people in this building are rooting for Joe, is that his personality, and you saw it on Hard Knocks. I mean, Joe Schoen getting advice from Brandon Brown. Brandon Brown was a general manager candidate before or at the same time as Joe Schoen was. So Joe Schoen bringing in Brandon Brown to be his assistant general manager and then giving him, I don't want to say authority, but giving him the voice that he has shown both publicly and behind the scenes says a lot about Joe Schoen and what he's trying to build here, I thought. And I thought you hit on that, kind of painting the contrast between what was here with Dave Gettleman and probably what was his biggest failure versus why they believe it will work with Joe Schoen. It may not. Look, now we got to see, as Joe Schoen said yesterday in his presser, now it's up to the guys on the field, the coaches, they've given them the players. Did they give them the right players? Did they give them enough players? We're going to find out. But, these players now have to go out and live up to what they believe they can do. But something about, that struck me, the idea of how you were able to paint that picture of what would, before Schoen and after Schoen, and why people in this building believe that Schoen's process works, or at least has a chance to work.
And I'm sure you talk to a lot of scouts around the league too. You can talk to some of these scouts, and man, they just feel like they're on an island in their own world, without a voice, without an opinion. And Joe Schoen lived that world. I mean, he said it himself. You can feel like an independent contractor. You're in a crappy rental car, driving through, BF Egypt, right? Like, you're missing birthdays, or you're missing youth football championships. Like Joe Schoen lived it 9+ years of his life out of Marriott's alone. And there were some Hilton properties before that. So I think the fact that he lived it like recently, and this is what a former Giant scout told me, like Dave Gettleman was a scout, but it was kind of like, it feels like a long time ago, like the mid 90s. So maybe he kind of lost touch for what it's like when you're out there. And look, scouts are the lifeblood of an organization. I mean, you're out there getting background, learning about these players, bringing that information back. And I think that Joe Schoen just gets, it's a small thing, but he hops on these Zoom calls with his scouts just to check in. Yeah, and we saw it on Hard Knocks too, where the draft ends. He's sitting down with each scout, helping them improve. Like, I know scouts who never have a seat at any table. It's like they feel worthless. They feel like they don't matter, and that's gonna poison something, right? How do you define it? That's the thing about football. Like 22 bodies crashing into each other. Strategically, like it's not as cut and dry as baseball or bat. Like, how do you connect point A to point B? Some way, somehow, it's only going to hurt you if you've got a room full of scouts and personnel people who, as one former Giant scout said, feel like they have to just please Dave Gettleman. Your whole goal being just make him happy, get on his side. You're not going to have disagreement. You're not going to have vibrant debate. You're not going to come to that point where you think outside of the box and draft a player that you like that other teams might not be as high on, and that's the player who maybe just tips it your direction a little bit. This sport is 1-3-4 plays a game. Like, the margins are so razor thin. It just, I don't know why organizations wouldn't want disagreement. You better have a room full of people who disagree. And that's what they have. I mean, Joe Schoen, as you kind of said, he has surrounded himself with talented scouts, talented personnel people who will push back. And they let us look at it all at Hard Knocks too, to an extent, right? Like it felt like you got a pretty decent idea by Hard Knocks standards for sure of how things are really run there. Well, like, it's year 3, time to win, right? You got to win.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But they've got their guys now. They've got their guys.
Lead me to the last point, and like I said, that was great. Between Brandon Brown and Chris Rossetti and Dennis Hickey and Tim McDonald, I know Tim McDonald. He's a member of the Mara family. He's John's nephew, but Tim McDonald is part of this personnel department. I mean, if his opinion wasn't valued, they wouldn't. You need that kind of opinion in the room. And it's not just somebody who just came off the golf course and jumped into the back room and all of a sudden is, shouting opinions because of who his, relation is. I think Joe Schoen has kind of built his inner circle, and I think he values the opinions of everybody that's in his group. Now that brings me to the last one, Malik Nabers. You mentioned too, and Joe Schoen talked about the idea of Nabers reminds him of Steve Smith when he watched him in Carolina and Stephon Diggs when he got to Buffalo. I thought Brandon Brown on Hard Knocks, when he talked about, Malik bringing something to the Giants that they just don't have. They have a bunch of likable, nice, smiling guys. I mean, Dexter Lawrence is as tough as they come. And if I was, going into a back room with Dexter Lawrence and I pissed him off, he'd kick my ass and we'd be done with it. But that's not Dex. Dex is smiling, dancing, he's sexy Dexy. Malik Nabers is, 17 out of 18 targets he catches against the Lions, and then the 18th one he doesn't catch, and then all of a sudden he slaps the helmet of the Detroit player on the way back, and they start throwing, haymakers. I mean, Malik Nabers, I thought the comparison that you had in here is something that several people in the building have told me, and it's going to be in a story that I was writing on Malik, so I thought it was interesting. Tiki mentioned Jeremy Shockey and the edge that Shockey brought to the field. I think Malik Nabers can have that kind of effect on the Giants. Your thoughts?
That 100%. And I tell you what, getting to know Jeremy Shockey for Blood and Guts, my tight ends book a couple years ago, was the highlight of that whole project. I mean, to be able to hang out in South Beach at a bar with Jeremy Shockey in his element, that's where you got to hang out with Shockey at the bar. But he is nuts, obviously, but was everything that team needed at that time. And of course he crossed lines. Of course he pissed people off and eventually wore out his welcome, all that stuff. But from one, getting into that fight with Brandon Short, rolling around like Short told me where, alligators and gorillas just kind of beating the hell out of each other.
Right.
I think alligators and lions, now that I think about it. From that moment forward, he just kind of was this energy source for that team, right? I mean, the numbers were there, the production was there, but his impact was so far beyond everything on the field, which was really, really good. And I think that, the quote that Joe Schoen used, he was a scout with the Carolina Panthers, and then he was with the Buffalo Bills. So he sees a ton of Stephon Diggs and a ton of Steve Smith and Malik Nabers. He said, quote, "When you line up against Steve Smith or Malik, they're going to try to rip your throat out. They're going to try to embarrass you, and you like that. That competitiveness frames everybody's effort and attention to detail in practice and all that stuff. Malik's done that." So I don't know if he's necessarily fighting teammates because he doesn't want to, sing his team song and, say his, but some way, somehow they needed an energy source to just kick this thing in the high gear. And here in Buffalo, it just kind of, I get it. Like the Diggs thing ran its course. I've talked to Brandon Beane about this, and there are so many factors that went into why they traded him. Financial, creating a leadership vacuum for Josh Allen, wanting to go into that playoff moment with guys who don't have those scars, which, by the way, in the playoffs, Stephon Diggs, that drop comes to mind, hasn't really produced. Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into it. But just from fans who have just kind of said he's a cancer, he was all drama, get rid of him. Like, he was everything the Bills needed in 2020. They needed a player who could kind of teach them how to believe, teach them, like, look, you had that 17-year playoff drought. You're the same old Bills. No, like, we're coming in here to kick people's butts. And I'm going to show you how it's done. And he's going to cross lines. And it's not going to be for everybody. But yeah, like Chad Hall's receivers coach said, like, you want him in your foxhole. Like, he is your damn dog. He is your alpha. You want to go to war with this guy. The Giants needed somebody like that. And as Shane said, that's been Malik Nabers.
And now he is the one, literally the one on his back. When you unretire, when you can get a franchise like the Giants, who is all about celebrating their 100th anniversary this year, their 100th season, and they take a jersey, the first jersey that was ever retired in professional football, and bring it out of mothballs and give it to Malik Nabers, it speaks volumes that this kid, 21 years old, is going to wear number 1 for the Giants. It shows the respect he's not only earned in this building, but the expectations that he has, and really the respect he's shown to Flaherty family. Ray Flaherty is the one who wore number 1, and now that's retired. So, it's an interesting one, but Nabers is no doubt going to be the focal point of a lot that the Giants are doing. Tyler Dunne, tell everybody what they can do, where they can find you, and get those subscriptions to golongtd.com.
Hey, I appreciate the opportunity, Art. This was a hell of a time, man, and can't wait to see you back out there in Jersey. But golongtd.com. It's just $8 a month, $50 for the year. Always just try to cover this sport through that long form lens, man. I always was into the long form, the feature writing, back to the Buffalo News, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, Bleacher Report days, and wanted to create a home for this kind of old school sit down journalism. So I can't thank the Giant fans enough for finding us to go long. I mean, a couple of years ago with that autopsy that you mentioned, was able to meet a lot of Giant fans then, and a lot of them stuck around. So we'll be tapping into the Giants as much as we can here at Go Long. So that's where I should say this too. I was just looking at my office. I got a bunch of copies of the Blood and Guts with Jeremy Shockey on the cover. So, hey, if anybody out there subscribes annually, just shoot me a DM or shoot me an email, golongtd@gmail.com. Reach me some way, somehow, and I'll send you a book as well.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Tyler Dunne, and as usual, we are all in. We appreciate everybody being all in. Hope you enjoyed today's show. Enjoy the weekend, and then when we come back next week, it is all in on the Minnesota Vikings, September 8th, Sunday. We will be in game week. So for Paul Wood, our producer, Tyler Dunne, I'm Art Stapleton. Thanks for being all in. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll get you going. Week 1 is coming up next week.